The tax assessor's card listed the cabin at $340. Not low, not depressed. $340 for 11 acres of Maine mountain rock. A falling down warden's cabin with moss climbing 2 feet up the north wall, and a rusted fire tower nobody had climbed in 14 months. The buildings themselves were listed at zero. A teardown the assessor had written in the margin in the kind of handwriting people use when they have already decided. It was the only thing in the entire divorce her husband's lawyer didn't bother to fight for. So at 41 with $1,087 to her name, a Ford F-150 with 187,000 miles on the odometer, and nowhere left in the world she was expected to be by morning. Wren Calloway drove 4.5 hours north into the Maine woods to sell it and put the whole sorry business behind her. She meant to be back on the interstate by sunset the next day. Instead, on her first freezing night in that cabin, she lit an old kerosene lamp and set it in the window without knowing why. Without knowing she had just repeated exactly something her father had done every single night for 32 years. And 3 days later, when she pried up a loose plank by the wood stove, what she found in the dark beneath that floor would make an entire county in northern Maine remember a man even his own daughter never truly knew. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe and tap that little bell. Because the secret hidden under Wren's floor is the kind of thing that stays with you long after this story ends. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. We love seeing how far these stories travel through the dark. Now, let's begin. The lawyer's office in Portland smelled like cold coffee and new carpet. The kind of smell that belongs to rooms where people lose things politely. Wren sat in a padded chair while a man named Sutcliffe read the terms of the settlement in a voice flat enough to file taxes by. Bram wasn't there. He'd sent his attorney instead, a younger man with a good haircut and a folder full of colored plastic tabs, who checked his phone twice before the meeting even started. He sends his regards, the young attorney said, not quite looking at her. His regards. Wren repeated the word strange in her mouth. The attorney slid a pen across the table. 6 inches of mahogany, 3 initials, and we're done here, Mrs. Calloway. She signed where the colored tabs told her to. 16 years of marriage folded down into a stapled packet she could have mailed for the cost of a single stamp. The attorney ran his finger down the asset schedule the way you'd point at items on a diner menu. The house on Halford Street, the savings account, the retirement, the good Subaru, all of it staying with Mr. Calloway under the terms. Then he tapped a single line near the bottom and almost skipped past it entirely. This last one stays with you, he said. Real property, Piscataquis County, north of Greenville. A cabin looks like. He glanced up. You'll want to deal with the back taxes on that at some point. What's it worth? Wren asked. Honestly? The young attorney almost smiled. The county has the structure valued at zero. $340 for the land. Mr. Calloway's position was that it wasn't worth the cost of contesting. That was the kindest thing anyone said to her all day, though it wasn't meant kindly. The cabin was hers because nobody else could think of a single reason to want it. She walked out to the parking lot and set a cardboard box in the bed of the truck. Inside the box were the things Bram had left on the kitchen island for her to collect like leftovers a neighbor returns. A chipped mixing bowl that had been her mother's. A framed photo of her father in his Forest Service coat sleeves, rolled squinting into a Maine summer. A wristwatch that had stopped keeping time somewhere around her 35th birthday. 16 years, and it fit in a box she could carry under one arm. The Ford was the color of a dried oak leaf with a tailgate that had to be lifted just so, and a heater that took the first 10 minutes of any drive to make up its mind. Bram had bought it used for a remodel project and forgotten about it, and when the marriage came apart, he'd waved it toward her like a man tipping a valet. Wren sat behind the wheel for a long moment with her hands at 10 and 2 and nowhere in particular to go. She had no apartment. She had no job, having quit hers 14 years ago to follow Bram's lecturing career from Boston to Providence to Hartford, to a small college outside Portland that finally gave him tenure and an assistant named Megan. She had no friends who hadn't started out as his. What she had was a folded piece of paper on the passenger seat. She unfolded it at the first red light because she couldn't help herself. The deed was old soft at the creases from years in a county filing cabinet, the typeface gone gray. The Calloway parcel, Saddlebrook, Piscataquis County, deeded to Wren Marie Calloway, under the last will and testament of Amon Joseph Calloway, deceased. Her father had left her the saddle when he died 14 months ago on a cold morning last October. She'd come for the funeral, stayed 2 nights in a hotel by the interstate, locked the cabin door, and driven home telling herself she'd deal with it later. Bram had said the place wasn't worth the property tax. She hadn't argued. She rarely argued with Bram. That had been the arrangement, though no one ever said it out loud. The light turned green. Wren pointed the truck north and let the city thin out behind her. The drive took 4.5 hours and changed its character 3 or 4 times along the way. Interstate gave way to state highway, which gave way to a county road, which finally gave way to a forest road that wasn't paved so much as remembered. A single lane of broken blacktop and gravel climbing into the high country through tunnels of red spruce and white pine. The trees carried the last of the autumn edges of rust and gold burning through the dark green. Wren cracked the window an inch and let the woods in. It smelled like wet stone and balsam and wood smoke from somewhere far off and underneath all of it. That older smell, she had no name for the one that lives in high places where the wind never fully stops. She had forgotten that smell. Her whole body remembered it before her mind did. She had spent summers up here as a girl back when her mother was still alive, and the cabin had 3 people in it. Wren Calloway had set her on the porch swing in June, while Eamon taught her the things he knew: how to read a sky, how to tell a black cherry from a black birch by the bark, how to sit in a fire lookout for 9 hours and watch 100 square miles of forest for the one thin wisp of smoke that mattered. "You're not watching for fire," her father would tell her, the both of them squinting into the green together. "You're watching for the moment the fire is still small enough that somebody can do something about it. Anybody can see a thing once it's burning. The trick is seeing it before." She had been 8, and she had thought he was talking about trees. Her mother had died when Wren was 11. Ovarian cancer. 6 months from the diagnosis to the funeral, and her father had come home from the hospital that last night and stood in the kitchen of the little house in Bangor with his Forest Service coat still on, and he had not cried where anyone could see him. He had simply walked out onto the back porch, and Wren had watched through the screen door as he lit the old kerosene lamp her mother kept on a shelf and set it on the porch rail. He stood there a long time looking at it. She had not understood then. She had been a child who only understood that her mother was gone, and her father had become very quiet. 3 months after the funeral, he had taken a transfer to the Saddlebrook Lookout in Piscataquis County, 200 miles north, the most remote tower in the state. He had moved into the cabin alone. Wren had stayed in Bangor with her Aunt Mabel through high school, and she had spent her summers on the mountain. And she had not in all those years ever asked her father what he did with the long winters when she was not there. Bram had found all of it charming when they were dating. A woman who could start a fire in the rain. Later he found it rural. He never told her to stop talking about her father, about the tower, about the mountain. He just stopped asking. And a thing you are never asked about is a thing you slowly put away, until one day you realize you have packed the best part of yourself into a box in the back of a closet, and you have forgotten which closet. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Because what Wren is about to find on that mountain reshapes everything you think this story is about. The forest road climbed and narrowed until the spruce closed overhead, and the late afternoon went green and underwater. She passed a shuttered Grange Hall with a hand-lettered sign, a single trailer, with 3 dogs in the yard and a gravel pull-off, where the county had once kept a road grader. Then the road bent around a shoulder of grey rock. The trees fell away. And there it was, Saddlebrook. The cabin sat in the low place between the 2 humps of the summit, which was how it had earned its name. A squat building of dark-stained logs with a tin roof gone the color of an old nickel, and a stone chimney leaning a few degrees off true. Behind it, rising out of the spruce, stood the fire tower, a skeleton of weathered steel with a small glass cab at the top, and a zigzag stairway climbing up into the wind. Wren parked in the clearing and sat with the engine ticking as it cooled. The cabin was smaller than she remembered, and rougher than she wanted it to be. One window pane was cracked corner to corner and patched with a square of plywood that someone had cut to fit. The porch sagged at the near end, where a post had rotted through. Moss had climbed 2 feet up the north wall and was working on the rest. The assessor had called it a teardown, and the assessor had not been wrong. And yet, the walls stood square. The roof, for all its rust, did not show daylight. And when she finally climbed out of the truck and crossed the dead November grass, The air smelled exactly the way it had smelled the last summer she had been happy here. She had come to sell a place she had been a child in. She had not expected the place to remember her back. The front door was locked. She tried the keys from the manila folder one by one, until the third, a long brass key worn smooth by 40 years of hands, turned with a gritty complaint. The door swung in on a single rusted hinge, and the smell of the inside came out to meet her like a held breath finally released. Dust and cold ash and cedar. The particular style of a room that has been waiting since the last person walked out. She stepped over the threshold and waited for her eyes to find the dim. The cabin was one main room with a sleeping loft above and a lean-to kitchen off the back. A cast-iron wood stove squatted in the center on a hearth of flat creek stones, the color of river bottom. A plank table stood against the window with two chairs, one of them mended at the leg with baling wire. The walls were lined with shelves her father had built, and the shelves held the ordinary archaeology of a life lived alone. A coffee can full of nails, a kerosene lamp with a smoke-black chimney, a row of field guides with broken spines, a transistor radio, a coil of climbing rope. On a peg by the door hung Eamon's worn canvas coat, faded to the color of a dust. A Forest Service patch on the shoulder, gone threadbare at the edge. Wren crossed the room and pressed her face into it before she knew she was going to. And it still smelled like him. Pipe tobacco and wood smoke and the cold, clean nothing of high altitude. She stood there a long time with her face in her dead father's coat and did not cry, because she had done her crying months ago in a guest room while Bram slept down the hall with the door shut, and that particular well had run dry. On the table sat his enamel thermos and a tin cup, and beside them a small block of basswood half carved into the shape of a bird that would never be finished. He had been whittling it the week he died. The breast was smooth. The wings were roughed in. The tail was still raw wood waiting for a knife that was not coming back. Wren set it down carefully and looked around the room she had inherited, and the practical part of her, the part Bram had spent 16 years promoting, at the expense of all the others, began doing arithmetic. Hire someone to haul the wood stove out, burn the rest or pay to dump it. List the 11 acres with a logger or a hunting club, and take whatever they offered for a saddle too steep to build on and too far from town to want. Turn $340 of dirt into a few $1,000s of cash, and put this mountain behind her like everything else. That was the plan when she walked through the door. It lasted about as long as the daylight did. She did not drive back down to the motel by the interstate. She told herself it was the road that nobody sane drove, a forest road like that after dark, and there was truth in it. But the truer thing, the one she did not say even to herself, was that she did not want to leave the smell of the coat. So she carried in the cardboard box and the sleeping bag she had thrown behind the seat out of old habit, and she built a fire in the wood stove the way Eamon had taught her 33 years ago. Kindling teepeed over a twist of birch bark. The draught cracked open just so. She sat on the warm hearthstones while the iron ticked and warmed, and pushed the cold back into the corners of the room 1 inch at a time. The lamp on the shelf still had kerosene in it. She lifted it down. She trimmed the wick with her pocket knife the way she had watched her father do 100 times. She set the lamp on the plank table by the window, struck a match and touched it to the wick. The small flame caught and doubled itself in the dark glass and threw a soft yellow circle over the whole room. Night on Saddlebrook was a thing she had forgotten too. No glow on the horizon, no hum of traffic, no neighbor's television leaking through a wall. There was only the wind working at the tin roof, the settling pops of the cooling stove, and a darkness outside so complete it pressed against the windows like water against the hull of a boat. She made coffee on the stovetop in a dented percolator, because that was what you did when you did not know what else to do. And she sat at the plank table in the lamplight in the cabin. Her father had left her with $1,087 and a truck, and a box of leftovers to her name. And for the first time in a very long while, no one in the world knew exactly where she was. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like setting down something she had been carrying so long, she had stopped feeling the weight of it. The lamp burned steady in the window behind her. She did not think anything of it. It was just a lamp. She slept in the loft on a bare thick mattress under a wool blanket that smelled of cedar and field mouse, and she slept hard the way you sleep at altitude. She woke before light to the sound of something moving in the clearing. The first gray was just coming into the windows, the thin Maine light that does not warm anything. Wren lay still and listened. Footsteps deliberate crossing the frost-stiff grass. The clink of metal, A pause. Then the unmistakable sound of someone setting something down on the porch boards and stepping back. She came down the loft ladder as quietly as she could, took the iron poker from beside the stove, out of an instinct she did not examine, and put her eye to the gap where the patched window pane met the frame. There was a young man in the clearing. He stood where the grass met the spruce watching the cabin, and he went very still when he saw the smoke rising from a chimney that had been cold for 14 months. Tall and thin in the way of someone still growing into his frame, maybe 19 in a canvas coat too big for him, and a knit cap pulled low, a battered pack on his back, an armload of split firewood he had just stacked on the porch. He did not run. He did not come closer. He just stood there with his breath smoking in the cold, looking at the chimney like it had betrayed him. Wren opened the door, the poker hanging forgotten at her side. The boy startled a step backward and then held his ground. "I didn't know anybody was up here," he called. "Who are you?" she said. "I bring the wood," the boy said, as if that explained everything. He nodded at the stack on the porch. "I keep the path to the spring open. I nailed the plywood over that window when a branch came through it in November." He looked at the chimney smoke again. "Nobody told me somebody was coming." "Why are you bringing wood to an empty cabin?" she asked. "Because it's not supposed to fall down," he said. "Eamon told me to keep it from falling down." The boy's jaw worked. "Nobody told me he'd want me to stop." His name was Tobin Marsh, and it took him 3 days and a great deal of silence to give her even that much. That first morning, he would not come inside. He stood on the porch with his cap in his hands and answered her questions in single syllables. His eyes moving constantly, the truck to the tree line to the road, the way a creature moves when it has learned that the nearest exit is the most important thing in any room. So she made him coffee instead, which he also would not take inside. And she carried 2 cups out to the cold porch, and they sat on the top step looking at the same wall of spruce, not talking, which it turned out was the only way Tobin Marsh knew how to be near another person. "You knew my father," she said finally. "He let me stay," Tobin said, after a long moment quieter. "He didn't ask me anything. He just put a bowl of beans in front of me and said the loft was mine as long as I wanted it." Wren looked at the boy's profile, at the careful way he held the warm cup with both hands, like it might be taken from him. "Where did you come from?" she asked. "Around," Tobin said. "Foster mostly, 11 houses by the time I aged out." He said it the way a man reads off a license plate. Flat, no feeling allowed near it. They give you a trash bag of your stuff and a list of phone numbers that don't pick up. Then you're 18 and you're a grown man and you go figure it out. And you came up here. There was a lamp in the window, Tobin said, looking at the porch boards. In the dark, in the rain, all the way up that road. You could see it from the last switchback. He shrugged a small motion. So I walked toward it. Wren filed that away without saying anything more, the way she was already learning to do with this boy. Because anything more than that, any question with edges on it, would send him back into the trees. But it stayed with her. A lamp in the window, a door that opened. She had lit that same lamp her first night without thinking. She had set it in that same window without knowing she was repeating anything at all. She made him eat a piece of toast on the porch step. She refilled his coffee. And she asked one more thing because she could not help it. "When was that, Tobin? When did you walk up that road the first time?" He thought about it. "February," he said. "Last February. It was 19 below up here that week. He had been 17. Her father had been dying. Wren Calloway had been 71 years old with a heart that his doctor had told him would not see another summer. And he had taken in a 17-year-old stranger with nowhere to go and not told a single soul. And he had been gone himself 8 months later. And in all those 8 months, in the 4 phone calls Wren had managed to make to her father, from the polite distance Bram preferred her to keep, her father had not once mentioned that there was a boy sleeping in the loft above his head. She did not say any of this to Tobin. She drank her coffee. She watched the grey light come up over the saddle. And the practical part of her, the part that had spent the night running arithmetic on a tear-down cabin, went very quiet inside her chest and did not come back. On the 3rd afternoon, with the sky going the color of wet slate and a wind starting to work in the high spruce, Tobin did a thing he had not done. He came up onto the porch where Wren was sitting with her cold coffee, and he stayed standing. "You ever been up the tower?" he said. "Not since I was a girl," Wren said. Eamon said most people never climb a thing they own, Tobin said. He said the best of the whole day is at the top. He stood there a moment waiting, and it was the closest to an invitation she had seen him offer anyone. So she set down the cup and followed him across the frosted clearing to the base of the fire tower. And they climbed the zigzag steel stairs in the failing light. 90-some steps, the whole structure humming faintly in the wind, until they came out into the little glass cab at the top, where her father had spent the better part of 40 years of his life. There was a stool bolted to the floor, a map table under glass gone soft with handling, a fire finder he had used to triangulate a column of smoke to the half-degree, and tacked to the wall above the map, faded almost to nothing, by 40 Maine winters of sun and cold, a child's drawing of a mountain with the sun over it, and 3 stick figures holding hands, a father, a mother, a small girl between them, signed in the wobbling capitals of a 6-year-old, Wren. She had no memory of drawing it. She had been 6 years old. Her mother had still been alive, and her father had kept that drawing on the wall of his lookout for 35 years, through all the long winters after Iris died. Through every fire season, and every storm and every quiet morning, he had keyed the radio at dawn alone, and he had never once in any of her summers up here pointed to it and said, "Look what I kept." She did not say anything. She did not trust her voice. She stood in the glass cab with her dead father's whole working life laid out around her. And below her the saddle fell away into county after county of black Maine forest, with one single point of yellow light burning in the cabin window where she had left the lamp. The only made light in 100 square miles of dark. He never lit it for himself, Tobin said beside her, looking down at it, the lamp. He lit it every night whether he was up here or down in town. I asked him once why when there wasn't anybody coming. What did he say? Wren asked. Tobin was quiet a moment, getting it right. He said you don't light it for the night somebody comes. He said you light it for all the nights they don't, so it'll already be lit on the one night they do. Wren stood at the glass and watched the small yellow point of her own light burning in the dark below her. She thought of her father standing on a back porch in Bangor 30 years ago with a lamp on the rail the night her mother died. She thought of a boy at 17 walking up a forest road in February with 19 below pressing through a coat too thin for the weather, and a yellow light visible from the last switchback. She thought of 4 phone calls in a year, and a husband who did not like the way her voice changed when she talked about her father, and a closet full of boxes she had stopped opening. And she thought for the first time that perhaps the lamp had not only been for strangers. She climbed down the tower stairs in the dark without speaking. Tobin went up to the loft. She banked the fire in the stove. And before she climbed the ladder herself, she did one thing. She trimmed the wick on the kerosene lamp. She topped off the oil from the can under the sink. And she set the lamp back in the window exactly where her father had set it every night for 32 years. And she did not yet know the number, only that it belonged there. The flame caught, the yellow circle held. Somewhere on a forest road below the saddle, a darkness she could not see pressed up against a light that had now been burning without interruption for 3 nights. She did not know yet about the loose plank by the wood stove. She did not know that in the morning when she moved the cast iron to true up the hearthstones, the broom would catch on a seam too clean to be an accident, and a board would lift, and a cold breath of paper and old metal would rise up out of the floor of her father's cabin to meet her. She only knew climbing the ladder in the dark that she was not going to be driving back down that mountain in the morning. She was not in fact sure she was ever driving back down at all. She could not make herself list the place. That was the truth she arrived at over the following week alone up there, with a boy who appeared at the woodline each morning and vanished into it each dusk. Every time she got as far as taking a photograph of the porch to send to a realtor in Bangor, she would notice something. The careful way the shelves were joined with hand-cut dovetails no commercial carpenter would have bothered with. The hooks Eamon had driven into the porch beam at 4 different heights, which made no sense at all until you understood they were meant for 4 different sizes of backpack. The second mattress rolled and tied in the loft corner with twine that had been replaced recently. The 3 coffee mugs lined up on the kitchen shelf when one man living alone needs only one. The cabin kept telling her things she did not yet have the words for. So she stopped trying to sell it and started doing the only thing she knew how to do when her life came apart, which was to fix something with her hands. She began with the rotted porch post on the near end. It was a small enough job. It was also a job she had no business attempting alone. She drove down into Greenville on the 4th morning and walked into Setzer's Hardware on the corner of Pritham Avenue and Lily Bay Road, a place that smelled of creosote and machine oil and wood stove smoke, and she stood in front of a wall of fasteners she did not recognize and felt the old reflex rise. The reflex to find a man and apologize for not knowing. She made herself stand there longer than was comfortable. A wiry old fellow in a flannel shirt buttoned to the throat came around the end of the aisle. Looked at her. Once looked again, and the second look went still on his face, the way a hand goes still on a doorknob. "You'd be Amon's," he said. It was not a question. Wren had not introduced herself. She had not said her father's name. She felt something move under her breastbone, the same thing that had moved when she had pressed her face into the canvas coat. "I'm Carver Setzer," the old man said. "I owned this place when your daddy first came up the mountain in '86. I owe him a porch post and a few other things besides. What's the cabin need?" Everything Wren said before she could soften it. "That'll do for a start," Setzer said. He sold her a length of pressure-treated 4x6 and a bag of galvanized lag bolts and a tube of construction adhesive. And when she pulled out her wallet, he waved his hand at her, like a man brushing off a fly. "Your daddy carried a tab for me in '79 that I paid back in '91, Setzer said, and he never once mentioned it in between. So you'll take the lumber and you'll let an old man feel like he's settled up." She tried to argue. He looked at her over the rim of his half-glasses with an expression that suggested the argument was already over and had been over before she opened her mouth. She drove back up the forest road with the 4x6 rattling in the truck bed and her face hot in a way she did not entirely understand. Bram had spent 16 years making her feel like a woman who consulted men before she did things. Up here, there did not seem to be any men available for consultation. There were only old men who would not take her money, and a young man who would not come inside. She set the post that afternoon with Tobin holding it plumb while she drove the lag bolts. The first one stripped because she had the wrong size socket. The second went in crooked because she was hurrying. The third she stopped and breathed and listened to her father's voice in the back of her head saying, "Patience on a thing is what makes it last," and the third went in straight and bit deep and held. She sat back on her heels on the cold porch boards and looked at the post and felt something she had not felt in 14 years, which was the small clean satisfaction of a thing she had done herself badly at first, and then better. Tobin watched her without comment. He had not in 3 days offered to take the drill from her hand. She understood eventually that this was a courtesy. He had figured out in some way she could not name that she needed to do it wrong before she was allowed to do it right. They worked side by side after that, though never quite together, always at a careful angle, the way a dog that has been kicked will sit near the fire but not in reach. She cleaned the stovepipe of a season's worth of creosote lying flat on her back on the hearthstones, with soot raining down onto her face and into her hair and her mouth. She came out from under the pipe, black-faced and coughing and laughing, in a small, surprised way she had not heard from herself in a long time. Tobin almost smiled. He turned his head before she could see it land. She reglazed the cracked window with putty she found gone hard in a tin under the sink, working it soft in her palms until it took. Her knuckles cracked and bled at the joints, and she did not care. On the 7th morning, she opened the front door to find a cord of split oak stacked along the south wall of the porch. Neatly, the rounds matched for size with a small white envelope tucked between two pieces. No one was in the clearing. Tobin was already at the spring, 2 buckets in his hands, the path open and clean ahead of him. Wren took the envelope inside and opened it at the plank table. The note was on a single sheet of lined notebook paper, in handwriting that wobbled but stayed legible. "For the next fella. Paid forward 12th time. Don't mention," it was all it said. It was signed with the initials WP and a date. She did not know who WP was. She did not know what he was the 12th time of. She set the note on the table and looked at it for a long while, and then she folded it carefully and slid it into the front of one of the field guides on the shelf, because it felt wrong to leave a thing like that loose. The next morning, there was a quart of milk and a dozen brown eggs on the porch in a wooden crate. The morning after that, a wool blanket washed and folded that smelled faintly of cedar and wood smoke, and another person's house. None of the gifts came with names. Tobin, when she asked him, only said, "You'll get used to it. They knew your daddy." She did not get used to it. She kept opening the door each morning and stopping on the threshold because the cabin had begun quietly to be cared for by people she had not met. The mountain was holding her up before she had thought to ask it for anything. Tobin worked beside her more each day, and somewhere in the second week, without her asking, the boy started to talk. Not about himself, about Eamon. That board sings, he said the first time she stepped on a particular plank by the stove, the one nearest the hearth. Your daddy never fixed it. Said it told him when somebody was up before him. What else, Wren said, because she wanted the coins to keep coming. He keyed the tower radio at dawn. Tobin said, working putty into a seam along the chinking. Read the weather to the whole district in a slow, flat voice, even when there wasn't anybody on duty to hear it. I asked him once why he bothered. He said a channel ought to have a human sound in it in case somebody out there was listening and needed to hear one. What else? He taught me the pole star way, Tobin said. How to walk a deer trail without spooking the deer. How to tell from the color of the spruce in August where a fire would run if one ever came. He smoothed the chinking flat with his thumb. He never once asked me what happened to me before. In a whole year. Tobin was quiet a moment. You don't know how loud that is until somebody finally doesn't ask. Wren handed him the next trowel of mud and did not ask either. And that was the kindness. The boy seemed to know it. On the 9th day, moving the wood stove 3 inches to true up the hearth, she found it. She had levered the stove off its stones with a length of pipe and a fence post, sweating in the cold. And when she swept the bare floor underneath to reset the bricks, the broom caught on something. Not a gap, a seam. Straight and clean, running square along the edge of one floor plank where it met the next. Too true to be an accident of age. Wren knelt and ran her fingers along it the way she had run them along the cabin's other secrets all week. The plank was not nailed. It was cut to lift. She worked the blade of her pocket knife into the seam and pried, and the board came up with a dry woody scrape, and beneath it was a cavity in the floor. Joist dry and clean and the size of a small footlocker. Cold air rose out of it, and the smell of paper and old metal and something else, something like a long-held breath finally given back to a room. Inside were 3 leather-bound ledgers, fat and soft-cornered, stacked one on the other. A green metal cash box of the kind you'd buy at any hardware store. And a coffee tin, the big 3-pound kind, its lid sealed with a strip of friction tape far too heavy to be coffee. Wren lifted the top ledger out with both hands. The leather was worn smooth and dark where 10,000 thumbs had opened it. And when she turned back the cover, the first page was filled with her father's handwriting, small and square, and slanting just slightly uphill. Dated November 14th, 1992. A man named Dale Renfrew came up the road tonight on foot, the first entry read. Walked off his shift at the paper mill in Millinocket and just kept walking. Didn't plan to come this far. Fed him. He talked till 2 in the morning about a thing that happened on the Green Chain in 78, a fellow he could not save. He never told his wife. Sent him home with a thermos in the morning. Told him the lamp stays lit if he ever needs it again. He won't. But it's there. Wren turned the page. The lamp stays lit. The door is not locked. The next entry was 3 weeks later. A different name. A different reason. A logger's wife from a town called Brownville with 2 children and a bruise she would not explain. Given the loft for a night and gas money for a sister's place in Sherbrooke in the morning. Then a runaway boy of 17, 3 days out from a group home in Bangor, fed and warmed and driven by Eamon himself, to the one sheriff in the county Eamon trusted to handle it gently. A deputy named Hollis Renfrew. Page after page after page. Names, dates, reasons. And at the end of nearly every one the same line in some form or another. The lamp stays lit. The door is not locked. Told them they could come back. She read them aloud after a while to the empty room, because it felt wrong to let words that quiet go unspoken into the air a second time. Tobin came in from the wood and stood in the doorway and listened without taking off his coat. And when she got to one that had no name on it, only a set of initials and the words, "Thank you for not asking me anything," the boy turned and went back out onto the porch, and Wren let him and did not follow. She understood now what the cabin had been trying to tell her all week. The hooks at different heights for different packs. The second mattress in the loft. The 3 mugs for a man who lived alone. The lamp she had lit her first night and set in the window without knowing why. For 32 years since the year her mother died, her father had quietly kept a light burning on a mountain in northern Maine so that anyone walking off the worst night of their life would have somewhere to walk toward. He had fed them and warmed them and listened to the things they could not say to anyone else. He had written each one down not as a debt but as a life. And he had never said a single word about it. Not to the county, not to the Bangor Daily News, not to his own daughter, who had spent the summers of her childhood 15 feet from a trapdoor she never knew was there. She opened the cash box. Inside was $243 in soft small bills, a brass key she did not recognize, and a folded receipt from Setzer's Hardware, dated 1993, for 2 folding cots and a kerosene heater that her father had kept for 31 years, for reasons she would never know. Then she peeled the tape off the coffee tin, and the tin was full of letters, 61 of them. She counted them twice because the number mattered to her in a way she could not explain. 61 letters in 61 different hands, some on lined notebook paper, some on the backs of church bulletins and feed store receipts, one written on the inside of a torn cereal box, all of them addressed in one way or another to the man on the mountain. A woman named Carla, who wrote that she had driven up Saddlebrook in the winter of 1994, meaning not to drive back down, and that the lamp in the window had been the only reason she had grandchildren now. A man named Pruitt, who wrote that Eamon's $40 and a tank of gas had got his family through the month the mill closed, and that he had paid it forward 11 times since and meant to keep going. A boy whose careful young handwriting only said, "Thank you for not asking me anything." The same words, signed with the same initials Wren had seen in the ledger. Signed only BM, letter after letter. A quiet archive of a county's worst nights and the one door that had stayed open through all of them. She read until her eyes would not focus, and then she put the letters back in the tin and the ledgers back on the table, and she sat with her hands flat on the wood and felt the room around her in a way she had not felt any room in a very long time. Then in the third ledger on a page, 2 from the back, she found her own name. Wren called tonight. The entry read dated a little over a year before her father died. Sounded thin. That Bram of hers does all the talking even when he's not in the room. You can hear him in the spaces where she used to put herself. She says everything's fine in the voice she's used since she was a girl, the one she'd use when things weren't. I didn't push. Never could push her. She's got her mother's spine. Goes quiet and sets like concrete. I wish she'd come up the mountain. I wish she'd sit in the tower with me one more time and watch the green for smoke and remember she was somebody before she was somebody's wife. But she won't. Maybe not ever. The lamp is lit for everybody else's child. I keep it lit for mine too, just in case. The door is not locked, Wren. It never was. He had written her name in a book of strangers and kept a light on for 16 years she never knew about. Wren closed the ledger and pressed it flat against her chest. The way you'd hold a child, and the well she had thought had run dry months ago turned out to have only been waiting for the right reason. She cried there on the floor of the cabin in the lamplight. Not for the marriage she had lost, but for the man who had kept a door unlocked his whole life and died before his own daughter walked through it. She came down off the mountain 2 mornings later for flour and propane and 3 more lamp wicks, because the wicks were the thing she could not run out of now. And that was the morning the county found out Wren Calloway's girl had come home. The diner at the bottom of the forest road was called Auntie M's, a single room with 8 stools at a counter and 3 booths along the window and a hand-painted sign that read, "Pie until it's gone." The woman behind the register was broad and grey and quick, and she looked at Wren over the cash drawer for a long 3 seconds before she said in a voice that carried the length of the room, "You're Eamon's. You've got his eyes." The diner turned around, and what happened next was a thing Wren had no room for. In 16 years with Bram, she had learned to be a woman people were polite to. These people were not polite. They were something older than polite. They came over to the booth 1 and 2 at a time. A grey-haired man took her hand in both of his. "Pruitt," he said. "Whitney Pruitt. Your daddy gave me $40 and a tank of gas the month the mill closed in '86. I sent it back as soon as I could, and he wouldn't take it. Told me to give it to the next fella instead." He held her hand a beat longer. "I've given it to the next fella 11 times now. I keep count. WP, the initials on the notebook paper. The cord of split oak on the porch. 12th time. He never told me," Wren said. "He never told anybody," Pruitt said. "And that was the whole of him. That's how you knew it was real." A nurse named Carla Lindquist sat down across from her and did not say much at all, because some deaths are too large for the mouth. She reached across the formica and put one hand over Wren's wrist and held it there a minute, and then got up and walked out of the diner with her eyes bright, and the bell over the door rang behind her. A slow, soft-spoken man in a sheriff's department jacket leaned on the end of the booth with his hat in his hands. Hollis Renfrew, the deputy from the Ledgers. More than one night over the years, Hollis said dispatch would get a call from up Saddlebrook. "Your daddy's voice steady as you please. I've got somebody up here needs a ride and a friendly face, Hollis. Come slow and come alone." He turned the hat in his hands. "When Wren Calloway asked you to come slow and come alone, you understood a life was getting handed across. I drove that road in every weather you can name. Never once regretted it." It went on like that for the better part of an hour, a whole county quietly returning the 32 years Eamon had spent on it. By the time Wren drove back up the forest road with 2 weeks of supplies in the truck bed and a propane heater Setzer had refused to charge her for, she understood that she had not inherited 11 acres and a teardown. She had inherited a lamp and a list of everyone it had ever been lit for, and a job she had not yet agreed to take. She did not know yet that she was about to be asked to refuse it. The silver truck came up the forest road 11 days after she had first set the lamp in the window. She heard it before she saw it. The smooth, deep note of an engine that cost more than the cabin, and her Ford and everything she owned, put together climbing the broken blacktop in a way the GMCs and Chevys of Piscataquis County never could. She came out onto the porch, wiping putty off her hands, and watched a clean silver Cadillac pickup, brand new with the dealer's tag still in the back window, pull into the clearing and stop square in front of the steps like a man planting a flag. The door opened and a man got out who did not belong on Saddlebrook and knew it and did not care. 54 maybe, trim in a quilted vest over a soft flannel that had never seen a wood splitter, in good leather boots that had never once seen mud. With the unhurried smile of a man who had already decided how a conversation was going to end before he stepped out of the truck. "Holcomb Thatcher," he said. "Northwood Heritage Resorts. You must be the daughter." "Wren Calloway," she said, and did not take the hand. "This is my place. What can I do for you?" He let the hand fall without any sign that it bothered him, and turned a slow circle, taking in the whole saddle, the tower. The view falling away blue to the east, where on a clear day you could see 3 counties folding into one another. "I made your father a fair offer on this parcel 4 times over 9 years, Thatcher said. "Generous, frankly, given what the county has it assessed at. He turned me down 4 times and never once gave me a reason a businessman could understand." He smiled smaller. "I was sorry to hear he passed. I'm here because I'd hate for his stubbornness to cost you what it cost him." Wren said nothing, which was a thing she had been learning from the woods and from her father's ledgers. That silence is a tool, and most men cannot stand to leave it lying on the table. Thatcher could not. "Let me be plain," he said. "This saddle is the only buildable summit in 40 miles with a view like that. And road access a grader could fix in a week. I've got 80 acres under contract all around you. I've got a lodge designed. 31 rooms, a restaurant, the whole thing. And every rendering of it sits right where we're standing. Your 11 acres are the keystone. Without the saddle there is no view, and without the view there is no reserve." He named a number then. 9,000. He watched her face the way a man watches a card table. And when the number did not move her, he named another. 48,000, he said, for a tax roll teardown and 11 acres of rock. You could start over anywhere. I'm told you're between things. Between things. That was Bram's phrase. The gentle little knife of it. The way he had always made her smallness sound like concern. Which meant Bram had talked to this man. Or someone Bram knew had. Wren felt the old reflex rise, the 16-year habit of softening, of agreeing, of making the man comfortable so the moment would end. And then she felt the lamp behind her in the window, and the 61 letters in the tin, and her father's handwriting saying, "The door is not locked, Wren. It never was." The reflex died where it stood. "The parcel is not for sale," Wren said. "It was not for sale when he was alive, and it is not for sale now. You can keep your renderings." That was where Holcomb Thatcher stopped smiling. "That's a shame," he said, the warmth gone out of his voice like heat out of a cold stovepipe. "Because here's the part your father never had to deal with. That cabin is a documented fire hazard. No permits, no inspection. A wood stove 40 years out of code. And my surveyor tells me there is a question about the old forest road easement that gives you access at all. He set a business card on the porch rail since she would not take it from his hand. My attorneys can spend 2 years and more money than you will ever see turning this place into a problem you cannot afford to keep, he said. Or you can take 48,000 and a clean walk. People in your situation usually come around once they do the arithmetic. He got back in the silver truck. People always do the arithmetic, he said through the window, and backed down off the saddle gravel, popping under tires that had never popped gravel before, and was gone. Wren stood on the porch a long time after the sound of him faded. Tobin had come up beside her at some point, silent as weather. That's the lodgeman, Tobin said quietly. He sent a surveyor up here twice while Eamon was still alive. Eamon ran him off both times. The boy looked at her sidelong. You going to be all right? I don't have a lawyer, Wren said. I don't have $48,000. I don't have 2 years. And I don't have anybody. She picked the card up off the rail and looked at it, the embossed letters cold under her thumb. So I honestly do not know. That night, she did not sleep. She lay in the loft and listened to the wind work the tin roof, and ran the arithmetic Thatcher had told her she would run, and the numbers did not come out in her favor. 2 years of legal bills she could not pay. A condemnation notice she could not fight. A lamp that would, in the end, be put out by a man in good boots with a folder of renderings. She climbed down the ladder in the dark in her stocking feet and crossed the cold floor to the window and stood looking at the small, steady flame in the lamp. She thought of Carla in the diner, the nurse who had not been able to find words. She thought of Pruitt, 12 times paid forward and still counting. She thought of B.M., whoever he was writing. Thank you for not asking me anything, on a torn cereal box in a hand still half-shaped by childhood. She thought of her father in the year he was dying. Opening the door at 71 years old to a 17-year-old stranger in 19 below weather, because the lamp had been lit and a boy had walked toward it. And then she did the thing she had spent 16 years not doing. She picked up her phone, the bars flickering one and out, and she called her ex-husband. Bram answered on the 4th ring with the careful voice he used when he was about to lie. Wren, it's late. Is everything all right? You told Thatcher about me, she said. The silence on the other end was the answer. You told him I was broke and alone and that I would sell, she said. You told him to come find me. I told a friend who knows a friend. Bram said finally. And I am trying very hard, Wren, to keep my voice level here because honestly, sweetheart, you have no business sitting on top of a mountain pretending to be your father. Take the money. Come back to Portland. We can talk about what's next. She did not answer him. She set the phone down on the plank table, face down, very gently, the way you'd set down a thing you intended never to pick up again. Outside, somewhere far below the saddle, the wind was rising up the forest road from the south, and a band of weather she could not yet see was moving in across the dark face of the mountain. And the lamp in the window burned on small and yellow and certain. And Wren Calloway stood in her father's cabin alone and understood that by morning she was going to have to choose what kind of woman her father's lamp had finally, after 41 years, lit her way to becoming. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the plank table with the phone face down and the lamp burning a foot from her elbow, and she watched the small flame move with the breath of the room, and tried to think the way her father would have thought. He had not been a man who fought things head-on. He had been a man who 19 years before he died had quietly done something in a county courthouse and never told a living soul about it. He had been a man who understood that the strongest thing you could do for a place was something so quiet it could not be undone by men in good boots who came up forest roads with folders. Wren did not know yet what he had done. But somewhere in the small hours between the 3rd cup of coffee and the grey beginning of light at the east windows, she understood that he had done something. The man who had kept 32 years of ledgers under his floor and the deed restriction on his land that the assessor still did not seem to know about. The man who had told Hollis Renfrew to come slow and come alone. Who had paid Setzer back in 91 for a tab from 79 without ever naming it out loud. That man had not left his daughter 11 acres of rock and a teardown and a problem she could not solve. That man had left her something he had set up long ago, and she only had to be the kind of woman willing to look for it. She made another pot of coffee at 6. She sat with her hands wrapped around the warm tin cup, and she watched the saddle come up grey and then gold. And then she heard the sound of an engine on the forest road that was not the silver truck, and was not Tobin who walked in. A faded blue Buick sedan came up into the clearing and parked at a respectful distance, and a woman climbed out, late 60s, maybe tall and straight-backed, in a wool coat the color of pine bark, reading glasses on a chain at her throat, and a leather case in one hand that had the worn, soft look of a thing carried into a great many serious rooms. She stood by the car a moment and looked at the cabin and the tower. The way you look at a place you have heard about your whole life and never quite believed in. Then she came to the porch steps and stopped. "You'd be Wren," she said. "I'm Margaret Whitlow. I used to practice law down at the county seat in Dover, Foxcroft, before I had the good sense to quit." She looked up at the chimney smoke, and something moved across her face. "I came because Hollis Renfrew called me last night and told me Wren Calloway's daughter was up on the saddle, and because a man in a silver truck has been asking questions at the courthouse about your access easement. And the two of those things together got me out of a warm chair I had planned to die in. May I sit down?" Wren made coffee, and they sat at the plank table where Margaret Whitlow sat quietly, running her hand along the wood she had sat exactly once before, 33 years ago, on the worst night of her life. Wren waited. Margaret took off her glasses, folded them, held them in both hands. "My boy," she said, "my only one. He was 19, and he was in a bad way. I will not put words to when he drove up here in the dark because somebody at the hospital in Dover, a janitor of all people, told him there was an old man on Saddlebrook who would sit with you and not call anybody you did not want called." She turned the glasses over. "Your father kept him 3 days, fed him, walked the woods with him, did not lecture him, did not tell me. Just kept the light on and kept my boy breathing until my boy could do it himself." She put the glasses back on, and her voice came back to level. "He's 52 now, 2 children, an engineer down in Bangor. So when I tell you, Miss Calloway, that I am going to handle the man in the silver truck, I would like you to understand that I have been waiting 33 years for the chance. You would be doing me a kindness to let me." Wren showed her everything. She lifted the loose plank by the stove and brought out the 3 ledgers and the cash box and the coffee tin of 61 letters, and the old attorney went very quiet looking at it all. She read 3 of the letters and had to stop. Then she got businesslike, because businesslike was how Margaret Whitlow held herself together. She went through Thatcher's threats one by one and took the air out of each. "The fire hazard," she said, "a man cannot condemn your home because he wants the view from it. The county has not cited you. He is hoping the word inspection scares you into selling. So we take the word away from him. We will have a certified chimney sweep up here and a state fire marshal's inspection on record inside the week. And a 40-year-old stove maintained by a fire warden is not a public nuisance." She tapped the table. "The access easement is older than he is and recorded plain. That is a bluff too." She looked at Wren over the glasses. "Bluffs only work on people who cannot afford to call them, so let us make sure you can. But here is what I want to know." Margaret went on, and her voice changed. The leaning in voice. "Did your father ever do anything with the development rights to this land? Sign anything? Speak to anyone about a trust, conservancy, a preservation outfit? Think hard." Wren started to say no, and then she stopped, because the brass key in the cash box had been bothering her since the first day, a key that fit nothing in the cabin. And she remembered all at once and complete a summer afternoon when she was 16, sitting in the fire tower with her father, while a woman in a green field vest with a clipboard climbed the stairs. Wren shaking the woman's hand, the woman saying something about a thing being recorded, and her father saying in a voice Wren had filed away and forgotten for 25 years, "Then that's settled, and nobody can ever change it. Not after I am gone." She told Margaret about it now. The woman, the green vest, the word recorded. Margaret Whitlow set her coffee down very carefully. "Green vest," she said. "That would be the Maine Highlands Conservancy. Recorded." She stood up. "Get your coat. We are going to Dover, Foxcroft." It took them 2 days and a clerk named Erlene who had known Wren and treated the request like a personal mission, but they found it. Deed Book 178, page 42, recorded the 19th of June, 19 years before Wren died. A conservation easement. Wren Joseph Calloway, with no fanfare and no mention to a living soul, had granted the development rights to all 11 acres of the Saddlebrook parcel to the Maine Highlands Conservancy in perpetuity. The land could never be subdivided. It could never host commercial lodging. It could hold the cabin that stood on it. and nothing larger forever by a deed restriction that ran with the land, no matter who owned it. No matter how many silver trucks came up the road. He had given away for nothing 19 years before he died, the exact thing Holcomb Thatcher had driven up the mountain to buy. Wren stared at the page until the small uphill slant of her father's signature went soft at the edges. "But Thatcher is a developer," she said. "Wouldn't his lawyers have found this? Why offer me a dime for land he cannot build on?" Margaret smiled, and it was not a warm smile. "Oh, he found it," she said. "A title search would turn this up in an afternoon. He has known about this easement longer than you have." She folded her hands on the clerk's table. "Which tells me exactly what he was really doing up on your porch. He was not betting you would sell him buildable land, child. He was betting you did not know what you had, that you were broke and grieving and divorced and would take $9,000 to make him go away. And then, once it was his, he would go to that little land trust, 2 desks above a feed store in Greenville, always short on money, and he would make them an offer to amend the easement. Trade them a bigger parcel somewhere else. Write them a check they could not say no to. Get the restriction lifted quiet. It happens. Cash-poor trusts have done worse." She tapped the deed book. He was counting on 2 things, Margaret said, that the heir was ignorant and that the trust could be bought. And he was wrong. "On both counts," Wren said slowly. "On both counts," Margaret said, "because you know exactly what you have now, and that trust will never ever let this easement go." She looked up. "You want to know who runs the Maine Highlands Conservancy these days?" A woman named Carla Lindquist took the volunteer director's seat 8 years ago. She turned the page of her own memory. "Drove up Saddlebrook in 1994, meaning not to drive back down. You have her letter in that coffee tin." The brass key, it turned out, fit a small lockbox at the Conservancy's office in Greenville, where the original signed grant had been kept all this time with a note in Eamon's hand clipped to it. "For Wren, when the time comes, she will understand." Margaret drove her the 40 minutes back down to Greenville herself, because she said a thing like this should not be opened alone in an empty room. The office was 2 desks and a coffee maker on the 2nd floor above the feed store on Lakeview Street, and the woman who came out to meet them was the nurse from Auntie M's, the one who had not been able to find words. Carla Lindquist put a hand to her mouth when she saw what Wren was holding. "I knew he had put a restriction on it," Carla said. "I did not know he had left a key for you." She sat down heavily. "That developer's people called us in the spring. Twice. Offered the Conservancy a 40-acre tract over by Gulf Hagas to release the rights on the saddle. A better parcel, they said. More public benefit, they said." She shook her head slowly. "I let them finish the whole pitch both times. Then I told them the same thing. That the man who placed this easement pulled my truck out of a ditch in a snowstorm at 2 o'clock in the morning and never told a soul. And that there is no acreage on God's earth that buys back what this mountain is." She looked at Wren. They did not understand that. People like that never do. They think everything has a price because everything they have got, they bought. Under the folded grant in the lockbox, Wren found a second envelope she had not expected. Thin, soft at the corners. Her name on the front in the small uphill hand. She did not open it there. She drove back up the mountain alone in the afternoon light with the envelope on the passenger seat beside her, and she opened it that night in the loft by the lamp alone. She never told anyone what was in it, not even Tobin, except that afterward she folded the letter back along its worn creases and tucked it into the front cover of a fresh leather ledger she had bought at Setzer's that same morning, before any of them had known what they would find in Dover Foxcroft, where she could find it. The way Tobin kept his own entry where he could find it. The way the whole county kept the small proofs that someone had once thought they were worth the trouble. Holcomb Thatcher came back up the mountain 8 days later, and this time he did not get out of the truck. Margaret Whitlow was the one who walked down off the porch to meet him in her wool coat with a manila envelope in her hand. Wren watched from the top step while the old attorney passed her envelope through the driver's window and said something brief and unpleasant that Wren could not hear. She did not need to hear it. She watched the back of Thatcher's neck go red, watched him pull the recorded easement halfway out of the envelope and shove it back, watched him say something sharp, and watched Margaret answer with the serene immovability of a woman who had been waiting 33 years and had all the time in the world. The window went up. The silver truck backed down off the saddle for the last time, careful now on the gravel. And Wren never saw it again. He had come for a keystone and found a locked door. The same locked door in a way that Wren Calloway had been leaving unlocked for everyone but men like him for 32 years. "There is a kind of justice that does not need a courtroom," Margaret said, climbing the porch steps. "Your father built it 19 years ago and never told a soul." She looked around the saddle at the tower and the cabin, and the view falling away blue to the east. He did not do it to beat anybody. He did it so this would stay a place a person could walk to when they had nowhere else long after he was gone. She handed Wren the envelope. "It is yours now, the land and the reason for it. The rest is up to you." The county found out the way a county finds out everything, slowly and then all at once. Margaret could not keep a good thing quiet the way Eamon had, and by spring the story of the lamp on Saddlebrook had traveled the length of Piscataquis County and a few counties past it. People started coming up the forest road, not in trouble this time, but to leave things. A logger left a cord of split maple stacked by the porch without a word. Pruitt left an envelope of small bills in the cash box, the 13th time paid forward, and a note that said only for the next fella. Hollis Renfrew came up on his day off and helped Tobin rehang the porch gutter, and stayed for coffee, and told a story about Eamon that made all three of them laugh until the cabin rang with it. A sound Wren thought those walls had not heard enough of. She stayed. She had come up with $1,087 and a plan to sell, and somewhere between the loose plank and the deed book, she had stopped looking for the exit the way Tobin had finally stopped looking for it too. She took a part-time job at Setzer's to keep the propane filled and the lights on. She learned to run the fire tower radio, and on summer mornings she would key it at dawn and read the weather to the whole district in a slow, flat voice, even when no one was on duty to hear it. Because a channel ought to have a human sound in it, in case somebody out there was listening and needed one. She walked the green every clear afternoon, first out of habit, then out of love. She started a fourth ledger. She did not tell anyone she had done it. She took a new leather book off the shelf at Setzer's, the closest she could find to the old ones, and she tucked her father's last letter inside the front cover, and she waited. She did not wait long. It was a night in early May, a cold rain coming sideways off the ridge. The kind of night when the spruce smelled black and the lake was the color of pewter, and the wind worked the tin roof in a way she had finally stopped hearing. Headlights she did not recognize crawled up the last switchback and stopped in the clearing. A young woman climbed out 30 maybe in a thin denim jacket soaked through, and she lifted a sleeping child off the back seat and held him against her shoulder, his small bare ankles white in the porch light. She looked at the cabin, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the single yellow lamp burning in the window, and then at Wren in the open doorway. She had the expression Wren had seen on other faces, and once for 16 years in her own mirror. Someone carrying more than she could say. "I'm sorry," the woman said. Her voice did not have enough breath in it. "I saw the light. I did not think anybody. I can go." "You can't go," Wren said. "It's coming down too hard and that boy is asleep." She stepped back and held the door wide. "Come in out of it. There is stew on the stove and the loft is made up." The woman did not move for a long second. Why, she said. The same question Wren had asked Setzer about the lamp wicks. The same question she suspected 61 people had asked over 32 years on 61 different nights at this door. Wren smiled small and steady. "My father used to get asked that a lot," she said. "Come inside." She fed them. She warmed them. She made up the loft properly with the cedar-smelling quilt Carla had pressed into her hands at the diner months ago. And she did not ask the woman a single question she did not want to answer. The boy slept through the whole of it, his cheek pressed against the quilt, his small hand curled around the corner of the pillowcase the way children sleep when they have decided finally that a place is safe. In the morning after the rain had blown through and the woman had gone on toward a sister's place in Lewiston with a full tank of gas and $40 folded into her coat pocket and a thermos Wren had pressed on her at the door, Wren sat at the plank table and opened the new ledger. She wrote in a hand that slanted just slightly uphill, the way her father's had the date and a name and a reason, and at the end of it, the only line that mattered. "The lamp stays lit. The door is not locked. Told her she could come back." Tobin read it over her shoulder, which he would not have done a season ago, and was quiet a while. He would have liked that you kept it the same, he said. He would have liked that you stayed, Wren said. The boy went a little still the way he did. And then he nodded and went out to split the wood that did not split itself. And Wren watched him from the window. A thin kid in a coat that finally fit, working in the clearing of a mountain that could never be sold under a tower. His grandfather by choice had watched 100 square miles of green from. And she understood at last what her father had really left her. Maybe that is the part most of us miss. We spend our lives measuring the wrong things. The house, the savings, the good Subaru, the view from the summit. And we call that worth. And we let the people who measure that way tell us what we are worth too. But the things that actually hold a place together never show up on an assessor's card. A man fed strangers in the dark for 32 years and wrote each one down not as a debt but as a life. He never asked to be thanked. He never told a soul. And in the end, the quiet kindness he gave away for free was the one thing on that whole mountain that no amount of money could ever buy, because he had made it mean too much to too many people for money to move it. Holcomb Thatcher had $48,000 and a folder full of renderings, and he lost to a man who had been dead for over a year. Because he never once understood that the most valuable thing a person can own is the good they have quietly done for someone who could not pay it back. That was Wren Calloway's real inheritance. Not the 11 acres, not the cabin the county valued at nothing. He had left his daughter a lamp and the long quiet record of every soul it had ever guided home, and the simplest instruction a person can be handed, which is to keep the light burning and not say much about it. A legacy, it turns out, is not what you leave behind. It is who you leave it for and whether they keep it lit. Every now and then, on a clear evening with the wind quiet for once in the spruce, Wren climbed the zigzag stairs of the old fire tower and sat in the little glass cab where her father had sat for 40 years, watching the forest for the one thin wisp of smoke that mattered the way he had taught her when she was 8, and she had thought he was only talking about trees. She would watch the light go gold and then rose and then gone. And down below in the window of the cabin, the lamp she had lit would come up bright as the dark came on, a single steady point of yellow on the whole black face of the mountain, small and certain and burning for whoever needed it next. The smell of balsam in the cold air, the far-off cry of a loon on Moosehead, the soft tick of the cooling stovepipe in the cabin below, and one yellow flame set in a window by the hand of a woman who had finally at 41 walked through the door her father had left unlocked her whole life. The road came up to her door, and the door was not locked. It never had been. So if there is a lamp you have been meaning to put in a window for somebody, some small kindness you keep telling yourself does not matter, because no one is there to see it, light it anyway. Light it for all the nights nobody comes, because you will almost never know which night was the one that mattered. And to the person walking up the dark road toward it, it will matter more than you could ever measure. Tell me in the comments tonight, whose lamp brought you home in your own life when you had nowhere else to walk toward? And whose lamp are you keeping lit now for someone you may never meet? The light is on. The door is not locked. It never was.